Driving to me is more than just moving from point A to point B. It is a way of life. Some find peace at a spa or on a beach, but for me, peace is found on the highway at 2 a.m., with nothing but the open road stretching before me. I come from a long line of truckers, and I was raised on the road. My father passed down his wisdom about driving, teaching me to rely on my instincts and knowledge. Nowadays, anyone can rely on GPS to find their way, but I don't believe in such nonsense. Those people will never experience the thrill of maneuvering through traffic on narrow back roads, or understand the sense of accomplishment that comes from blazing your own trail. For 23 years, I have relied on my skills, never getting lost, until last night, a night that will forever be etched in my memory. I was hauling a load of agricultural machinery to a remote area in Kentucky. It's a route I know like the back of my hand. I drove all day under the scorching May sun, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, I welcomed the cool embrace of the night. The traffic began to thin as the evening turned into early morning, and I found myself cruising on peaceful, empty roads. It was my happy place, making excellent time and feeling invigorated by the sensation of my tires gripping the pavement. This was the perfect time of night. That perfection abruptly shattered when I crested a steep incline and saw the two dreaded colors every trucker and driver despises, the flashing orange of construction signs and the red glow of brake lights stretching as far as the eye could see. Nothing angers me more than being stuck in stop-and-go traffic, especially in my big rig. I grumbled to myself until I spotted a small side road on my right, gleaming like a divine beacon. Most people would hesitate to take an unknown detour, but I am not like most people. As long as you maintain your sense of direction and use logic, back roads are nothing more than a minor deviation. With a slight wave to the gridlocked traffic, I veered onto the lonely road, leaving it behind in my dust. The road was narrow, but fortunately it was devoid of any traffic, as few would venture onto such a road at 1 a.m. It wound its way through a wooded area, causing me to slow down my rig. Nothing spoils a trip like colliding with a deer that suddenly appears in your path. The woods were shrouded in darkness, but my powerful lights pierced through it like a sharp blade. I kept my focus on the road, but I allowed myself occasional glances at the surroundings. It wasn't often that I traveled through the forest at night, and I refused to overlook the beauty of nature. The woods seemed eerily still, not in terms of sound, but in a sense of lifelessness. Having driven enough at night, I knew where to keep an eye out for nocturnal creatures. Yet there were none to be seen. No birds perched on the branches, no foxes darting between the bushes, not even a distant squirrel observing from a distance. I arrived at a fork in the road, utilizing my knowledge of the highway system to determine that I needed to keep right to bypass the construction and continue towards my destination. I made the right turn and continued along the gravel road, surrounded by the dense woods. Minutes turned into an endless stretch with no signs of anything beyond the trees. No other intersecting roads, no rural dwellings, not even a glimpse of power lines. After about an hour, I noticed a twisted tree on my left. Its gnarled appearance suggested it had weathered centuries, with decaying bark and branches resembling elongated claw-like fingers reaching out towards me. Despite the oppressive heat, a shiver ran down my spine. I pressed on for another 20 minutes when something peculiar occurred. It seemed impossible, but there to my left was that same clawed-fingered tree once again. Trees may bear similarities, but this one was too distinctive to be anything other than the exact same tree. I shook my head vigorously, trying to dispel the implausible thoughts racing through my mind. I convinced myself it was merely a coincidence, until I caught sight of the tree once more, this time on my right. The wind rustled through the branches, causing them to sway like outstretched claws, seemingly reaching out to grab me. Disregarding my safety, I pressed the gas pedal almost to the floor, speeding past the menacing tree. Thankfully, it didn't reappear. Time slipped away, much like sand through an hourglass, and yet I encountered no turns or signs of civilization. The silence began to wear on me, so I turned on the radio in search of some companionship. To my surprise, all I heard was static, which was inexplicable considering I had one of the best satellite radios available. Nonetheless, I left the static on, grateful for even that small distraction from the strange unease settling over me. Perhaps the radio served as a good luck charm because I finally reached another fork in the road. I estimated the distance and peered into the darkness ahead. hoping to spot any towns or highways, only to be greeted by pitch-black emptiness. With a flicker of hope, I turned left, relying on my instincts to guide me. However, it wasn't long before yet another turn emerged before me. This time, I veered right, covering only half a mile before another tight turn presented itself. I continued to the right, only to be confronted by another immediate turn. The space was barely sufficient for my truck to make the left turn. I couldn't help but wonder who had designed these roads and wished they could experience the wrath of all 18 of my tires. Once again, I found myself on an impossibly long stretch of road, growing increasingly concerned. By now, I should have reached some semblance of a highway. Desperate for contact with the outside world, despite being accustomed to the solitude of trucking, I longed for human connection. A glimmer of hope appeared on my left-hand side, a bright light piercing through the trees, signaling the presence of another big rig, just like mine. Relief washed over me, and I matched the speed of the other truck, sounding my horn in the timeless SOS signal of truckers. I eagerly awaited a response, but to my dismay, silence filled the air. I repeated the signal, but my cries fell on deaf ears. It was inconceivable that a fellow trucker wouldn't acknowledge that call. Struggling to see inside the cab of the truck amidst the darkness and tree shadows, I was met with a sudden surge of adrenaline as the other truck accelerated recklessly, surpassing me. Hoping to note down the license plate to warn other drivers of this breach in our unwritten code, I strained my eyes to decipher it. Although difficult due to the speed, my heart skipped a beat as I realized the last 4 digits were identical to mine. I shook my head vigorously, attempting to make sense of the situation. With millions of license plates out there had to be similarities. Another big rig in the middle of nowhere, by sheer coincidence, a voice inside my head reasoned. Opting to dismiss the voice, I searched for any signs of where the truck might have gone, but all traces of its presence and the road it had taken had vanished without a trace. A sense of deep discomfort settled within me, and I yearned for the familiar rumble of a highway, even the frustration of stop-and-go construction. The radio continued to emit static, interrupted occasionally by what seemed like faint voices. Increasing the volume, I strained my ears, and for a brief moment I could have sworn I heard 2 words that shouldn't have emanated from the radio. Jingle bells. Who on earth would play jingle bells in May? None of it made any sense, and I tried to convince myself that it was all a figment of my imagination. However, my doubts were shattered when I saw it. Out of the left window, I caught sight of a patch of swamp covered in a pristine layer of snow. It was utterly impossible. Even with the tree canopy, there was no way snow could have survived the scorching Kentucky heat of May. Yet there it was, glistening under the moonlight, as fresh as a morning cup of coffee. My truck gradually slowed down as I felt an overwhelming need to verify the reality before me. Bringing my vehicle to a stop, I reached for the door handle, and that's when I witnessed a large shadow dart past my door. Startled, a shiver ran down my spine, and I scanned my surroundings, searching for any trace of what had cast the eerie shadow. To my astonishment, there was nothing, just emptiness. Whatever had caused the shadow had vanished into thin air, and it wasn't the only thing. The snow had also disappeared, as if it had never been there at all. Overwhelmed by confusion and a growing sense of unease, I resorted to slapping my face, desperately seeking the sting that would confirm I wasn't trapped in a dream. I shifted my truck back into drive and continued on my journey, feeling more lost than ever before. In an attempt to find my bearings, I glanced up at the sky, hoping to navigate by the stars. However, the once clear sky had become completely clouded over. Wasn't the moon shining just a few minutes ago? My inner voice questioned. Confusion and fear gripped me as a thick and unnatural fog began rolling in, enveloping everything in its path. My discomfort escalated, and I reached my breaking point. I had to resort to something I had never done in my life. I turned on the truck's pre-installed GPS. I could almost feel my father rolling over in his grave, but my desperate desire to return to the main road overrode any reservations. The computer powered up, searching for my location, but its findings only intensified my unease. I had ventured completely off the map, with nothing but a field of black displayed before me. The supposedly advanced technology had failed me. I pressed on, hoping to catch a signal, but nothing seemed to work. Intermittently, I heard voices whispering through the radio, their words too faint for me to comprehend. The fog outside grew denser and denser, almost obscuring my view entirely. I strained my eyes and could have sworn I saw shapes moving within the thick haze. As the GPS emitted a sudden ding, jolting me with its unexpected sound, I glanced at it with a glimmer of hope. However, what appeared on the screen only added to my growing unease. It indicated that I was somewhere in Western Europe, an absurd notion that I promptly dismissed. The stubborn machine kept changing its location. Melbourne, Indiana, Nebraska, Udny. None of it made any sense. The whispers on the radio grew louder, tormenting my sanity. Finally, when I could bear it no longer, the fog lifted slightly ahead of me, revealing a dead end with menacing trees and their sharp branches blocking my path. I slammed on the brakes with all my might, and by some miracle, the truck screeched to a halt, narrowly avoiding impaling me on the trees. The fog swirled around me as if caressing my vehicle. Through the trees, the mist began to part slightly, and illuminated by my headlights, I caught a glimpse of a figure in the distance. Although relief should have washed over me, there was something deeply unsettling about the silhouette before me. Despite the intensity of my brightest lights, the entity remained shrouded in shadows, as if it defied the laws of light itself. I couldn't tear my eyes away from its haunting form, and then it began to move toward me. Its gait was not that of a human, but more akin to a specter gliding through the fog. The whispers on the radio grew louder, and amidst the cacophony, I distinctly heard my name uttered by a macabre voice. Tears streamed down my face, and I squeezed my eyes shut, desperately pleading, "This can't be real, dear God. Please let it not be real." Gripping the steering wheel with all my strength, I yearned to be back home on familiar roads. I felt a suffocating presence surrounding my truck, and a faint scratching sound reached my ears from outside the window. Once again, I heard my name whispered, not from the radio, but from directly outside. "Please!" I shouted to the heavens, and I forcefully opened my eyes. Suddenly, I found myself at a corner of a highway, surrounded by well-paved roads. I scanned my surroundings, but the forest, the fog, and the horrifying entity had all vanished. The radio had returned to normal, and the voice of Charlie Daniels filled the airwaves. Asleep at the wheel? In my 23 years of trucking, I had never found myself dozing off while driving. I couldn't even recall feeling tired. Glancing to my right, I saw the familiar golden arches of a fast food restaurant beckoning me, and I had never pulled into a parking lot so quickly. I parked the truck and took a few deep breaths. I was home, and I had never felt such relief. I glanced at the GPS, and for a moment, I thought the wretched thing had malfunctioned again. The screen indicated that I was a mere 5 miles from my drop-off point, despite not being due until noon at the earliest. There was no way I could have covered such a distance in just a couple of hours. I rushed into the restaurant, hoping that a cup of black coffee and some salty fries might clear my foggy mind. I sat there for an indeterminate amount of time, trying to make sense of the horrific night I had experienced, but to no avail. Finally, I headed to the restroom, intending to splash some cold water on my face. When I reached the sink and looked into the mirror, I dropped what remained of my coffee to the floor in shock. The reflection staring back at me was that of a man I didn't recognize, or at least not entirely. It was me, but not as I had last seen myself. My hair, once peppered with a few strands of gray, had turned completely gray. Wrinkles adorned my once smooth skin, and liver spots had emerged. In those mere hours, I had aged at least 15 years. I would have believed it to be a dream if not for the searing pain of the hot coffee on my leg. Having completed my delivery and parked my truck, I found myself sitting in a desolate parking lot, gripped by an overwhelming dread at the thought of driving back home. The once comforting refuge of my truck had transformed into a suffocating prison, and I couldn't bear the idea of embarking on those long, lonely journeys anymore. The future loomed uncertain, and I grappled with a profound sense of purposelessness. Whatever I had encountered last night remained an enigma, but deep within my soul, I knew it had been real. I share this account as a cautionary tale for all those brave souls who venture onto the dark and treacherous paths of the world. I implore you, for the sake of everything you hold dear, stay on the well-trodden roads and never stray from their safety.